Welcome back to The Trail, a college baseball recruiting podcast. My name is Trevor Powers, and I am joined again by co-host of this podcast, Sam Scharf. Sam, we really missed you last week. Coach Torresani did a really good job in filling in your shoes, but happy to have you back here and talk about some happenings in the recruiting world and answer some questions and do some scenarios. But glad to have you back on here.
It's great to be back. Looking forward to this conversation. The episode with Coach Torsani was a really good listen. So definitely encourage our viewers to take a look at that. A lot of great information based on his experiences, and I think some nuggets that families and players can gather from a man who's been in the college baseball landscape for many years. So definitely make sure to go back and check that one out.
Yeah, and I think he was able to relate kind of because now in the situation that Coach Torresani's in, he's been in the college space. He's now on that outside space. He's working his way back into the college space, and there's kind of just some different perspectives to there. The question I opened up with was, now that you're on this side, right? Now that you're on our side, what's the one thing you wish families knew more, right? Wish families understood better? And the information that he was able to offer from that was awesome. But this is your first time coming across this podcast, whether it's on YouTube or the podcast space, make sure to smash the subscribe button. We've had a lot of listeners from different parts of the country. Sam and I were talking about that before we got on, so we're hitting some different geographical spots of the country, but reaching out with questions, reaching out with positive feedback. We appreciate all that, whether it's on YouTube comments, whether you want to reach out to us on social medias or our personal emails, whether it's thetrailrecruiting@gmail.com. You got some questions that you want answered on the podcast, which we're going to kick off with, or if you just want to reach out and let us know that you appreciate the work we're doing. Both are nice little feathers in our cap, so we greatly appreciate those, but just want to make sure I plug our social channels, and make sure you're reaching out as we continue to, hopefully, as we get into off-season form. I know it's recruiting time, but off-season form is a lot of interviews, a lot of good conversations, and hopefully a lot of good content for everybody to be able to better understand the recruiting landscape. With that being said, Sam, let's get into the question. So a listener of the podcast reached out with some positive words. He has a 2026 graduate, and he just had a quick question. His son received a handful of calls on August 1st, so in a pretty good situation, and many of them just said, "You are high on our list and to stay in touch." I don't know what that means in the grand scheme of things. I understand that the process has slowed and most programs are trying to get to their 2025 class, but should I have my son text them every so often, every once in a while, or should he wait to hear from them? Sam, I'll let you answer that question. This is a two-parter, so just that one in general, where he's a 2026, coaches have kind of reached out with interest. How do you handle how often the player reaches out versus waiting for the coach to establish that contact?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Obviously, very positive to have heard from some schools post August 1st. I would encourage that player to be proactive in how he's communicating. There's obviously a fine line there in terms of overkill, but at a minimum, make sure that those coaches that have engaged with you have a copy of your fall schedule. They know where you're going to be playing throughout the course of this fall evaluation period that kicks off today, right? Friday, September 13th, as we record this podcast. And then, as you start to get into, what might be some of the key events in your region, certainly, right, with the 2026 class, you have WWBA underclass down in Fort Myers the first weekend in October. Just making sure that those coaches have your game schedule for those particular events. So highlighting anything that's of significance in the region, and then that big national event that kind of, really closes out, this fall recruiting period. So I think it's important to be proactive. If you have any good game tape, right, from some weekends that are coming up, it would be good to follow up with that. But you got to have purpose for these communications, right? They're not check-in, hello type of dialogue, right? There's got to be, value that you're providing to those coaches in terms of, their continued interest level in you and, how they're going to evaluate you here over the course of this fall season.
Yeah, I think that's really important to understand is, like, obviously don't badger them, right? Don't text daily, don't text even probably weekly, unless you have something of meaning to reach out and establish contact. But it never hurts to, like you said, any game tape, especially schedule, and you're in the area or it's a national event, like down in Jupiter, and being able to send that out. Hey, coach, don't know if you're going to be in town, but here's my schedule. I'm supposed to pitch or on X day, and just be able to establish that contact. As I've said in the past, right? This isn't, we're not giving relationship advice, so you're not Instagram DMing a coach and badgering them. They've established contact. They've said you're high on the list. So if you're reaching out in some form of fashion, like, they're not going to be like, God, this kid's getting on my nerves, right? Obviously, if there's a line to cross, right? But we're not sliding in Sydney Sweeney's direct messages here and just badgering with a message a day. You know, there's an interest coming on both sides. And as I always say, the relationship goes both ways. And that's where the other side of this is, if you aren't hearing back from them, like, understand where you stand in that scenario. So be able to balance the both of, like, I always say, like, so many kids want to sell themselves to programs, right? I'm interested in this program. This coach is reaching out. So they follow up. Coaches want to sell their program to the kid as well. So they're going to understand that, like, they have to continue to stay in contact. They have to continue to try to get out and see them play and make sure they get on the phone and converse, or get them on campus in any way they see. And making sure that, so many times we get so focused on what we can do as prospects. Well, understand that coaches are also trying to recruit you, right? They're over there stressing, and especially if you're high on their board, they're stressing about how they're going to impress this prospect to make sure that they can get the opportunity to have them be, you know, a potential prospect and recruit in their class. So always keep that in mind, that the street goes both ways. You don't have to initiate every conversation. The assumption is if you're actually high on their board, the coaches are going to be reaching out to you as well, and you're going to be able to understand kind of where the process goes. So you're not going to just be left in the dark, hypothetically, and not understanding where you stand. So, Sam, second part of this question, I think this is a really good one because I've never really been in this scenario. The head coach of one school invited him to a football game, actually 2 games. Awesome. Take advantage of those opportunities. Do you think they are bringing in a ton of recruits, or is this an opportunity that is a bit more limited to serious recruits only? This is one that, again, I offered my answer was, doesn't seem like something that they just throw around as offers, but I'm sure you've had guys that have been invited to football games. So is this something that is typical only for serious recruits, or this kind of, you know, a broad casted net and trying to get guys on campus?
Yeah, it's definitely a more serious interaction, right? Anytime you're bringing a player to campus, whether it's an unofficial visit, official visit, a fall baseball practice or game, you know, if it's a institution that has, you know, college football and they're bringing you on campus to take part in that activity, those are really good signs as a player. Ultimately, you know, it's another step in the direction of hopefully that culminating in an offer. But definitely take advantage of those, you know, invitations. I think it's a great chance for you to interact with the coaches as well, and start to build that relationship. You're obviously, you know, communicating via text and phone call, but there's, you know, something about being in the same room or being, you know, in person with somebody that really starts to give you a sense of their makeup, right? And how they go about their day-to-day business. And that player-coach relationship is so pivotal when you get to campus. So the more time you can really start to do your due diligence on that coaching staff and be around them as you work through, you know, the decision-making process, I think there's tremendous value in that.
Mm-hmm. I think, and I think the big thing, there's 2 things that I took away from this question is, one, just being on the other side, coaches don't like wasted time, right? Like, at the end of the day, these guys are trying to build a program, right? They're trying to build a contender. They're spending the fall trying to develop their talent in-house. Mm-hmm. They aren't just inviting you for the sake of just like, yeah, come to a football game, no worries. Like some of the invites that we get here at Backside Ground Balls Media are just like, yeah, come to a football game, no worries. But these coaches, when they're actively recruiting you and wanting you to get on campus, they know the time that it takes and how much time you have to spend with these prospective student athletes. And they're not wasting their time. And even a step above that if you've been invited by a head coach, right? Head coaches definitely don't waste their time recruiting prospects that they aren't serious about, at least in my experience, right? If they're gonna have somebody that they're kind of 50-50 on and they want to get more of a feel, it's not the head coach's responsibility to make sure that that kid feels at least that warm and fuzzy feeling through communication and making sure he stays, at least a little bit interested. The head coach is only going to focus on, again, people that I've been around and people that I've worked for. The head coach only focuses on guys that are serious, legitimate recruits, at least in my experience. So can say that this school might be different. They might invite everybody to football games. Every school is different, but I think in how this is mapped out, again, I think the one thing to definitely take away from this is you're in a great spot, right? When you have programs that are inviting you on campus and establishing contact and telling you that they're high on your list, you're in a really good spot compared to, as we're going to talk about a little later, maybe some 2026s that didn't hear a ton coming out of August 1st. But I think the big thing is obviously continue to keep that open line of communication, update them on your schedule for the fall, how things are going. Take advantage of these opportunities to go to football games. Maybe even if you're a fan of their biggest rival, still go out and enjoy the opportunity to go watch some good football and build that relationship with the staff and be able to maximize your recruiting experience. But ultimately for 2026, I think this prospect sounds like they're in as good a spot as any. But being able to understand what coaches are thinking on that side, I think is really important, which is why obviously we wanted to answer that question as we kicked off this podcast.
Yeah, just to make one more point on that as well. It's important as a prospect and a family to reciprocate that interest, right? You're being invited to do something. Accepting that is a really good way of showing that coaching staff your high level interest in that opportunity. You know what I mean? So I think that's also, important here. And then just as it relates to 2026 in totality, I mean, it's moving very slow within that class, right? Even for guys that did get, some interest after the August 1st period opened up. There's not as many offers, being thrown out to 2026 prospects, compared to a year ago with the 2025 class. There's a lot of reason for that, but ultimately, understanding how the market's moving, I think as a player and family, I would tell, most prospects in that class, like, be patient right now, have a really clear vision for what you will want to accomplish in the fall season. I think things will start to escalate, particularly, around Fort Myers for a lot of programs, both, in the Power Four and then the mid-major level. But as a player, especially as you get into the school year, right, make sure you're getting off to a great start in the classroom, building really good study habits. You're doing your prep work during the week, in terms of the weight room and skill work. Everything that needs to be in place for you to show up on the weekends, across this, next few weekends, with the fall recruiting period, and play at your best, you know what I mean? And then at that point, have a chance to really, sit down and have a better understanding of where you are in your recruiting process as you get into, that October, November camp period. And then, obviously the critical decisions in terms of how to best utilize your off season. So that's kind of what lays ahead. But just preach patience, because as a whole, like I said, there's not a lot of offers out there. It's not always a referendum on you as a player. It's how these coaches want to attack the class as a whole.
Sam, you can tell me if you've heard this before, and our loyal listeners might know what's coming next. Patiently proactive. Patiently proactive. I'm gonna get with our graphic designer here at Backside Ground Balls Media. We're gonna get that shirt up and running, and I'm definitely gonna start.
Merch.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna start being adamant about patiently proactive, right? We're being patient and understanding that the process is slowed, right? Maybe this is why a high level prospect, right, that has some interest might not have that offer that he's looking for, right? Because he probably sees some 2026s committing at this point in time, because it's not out of the question to see some commit. And maybe he's wondering why he hasn't gotten that accelerated, here's an official offer. Well, again, just be patient, continue to do what you're doing, right? Because obviously he's in a pretty good spot physically and athletically, but also it sounds like they're taking the necessary steps. So in a pretty good spot, but patiently proactive, continue to do good work. Don't just sit on your hands and expect offers to fall out of the sky. But ultimately, I think you're doing everything in your power to put yourself yourself in a really good position. And like you said, take these opportunities because it's really a networking opportunity, but through baseball, right? Like if you and I were invited to meet and interact with some higher ups in the industries that we work with, we wouldn't turn those opportunities down. So same thing from a
Absolutely.
prospect standpoint. You definitely 100% should take advantage of an opportunity to interact with the coaching staff and get to experience those because you never know, right? We're in an age where opportunities arise at later times, whether it's through the transfer portal or things happen, and you never want to burn bridges and you want to make sure you maximize those opportunities. So, Sam, you mentioned it. September 13th here is the opening of the fall recruiting calendar. So it's going to be a big time, especially 2025s and 2026s. 2026s are actively able to be recruited now. So it's going to be the first time, or at least this first little buffer period. I know a little bit of August had an active recruiting contact period mixed together, but this is going to be really kind of the full force for 2026's opportunities, especially with WWBA coming up in the fall, as well as 2025's, right? Last ditch efforts and kind of things like that. So, when you're sitting down and having a conversation with a family, maybe one of each and kind of use examples from both, what's kind of the conversation that you're having about the fall recruiting period and how to attack this and have a winning strategy, as we like to say, and make sure we maximize this time frame on the calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fall is very busy for college coaches, right? There's a lot of obligation on campus. Their own players are back. They have either begun or will be in the next, week or so, at least here in the Northeast, their fall ball season, right? So that's a combination of, practice and then inter squads. They'll have a couple outside competitions, as their fall season progresses. So there's a lot of, holding them to campus in that regard, plus other obligations that come up, from an athletic department or campus needs standpoint. So they're very busy. I think, from this time period, I would say that coaches are scouting players versus events, right? Like if they're going to show up at a particular game, it's because they're pretty far along in the recruiting process with that player, whether it be a 2025 or a 2026, and they're using that as a specific opportunity to make a decision in terms of what the next steps are for that prospect. I'd say it's more rare for coaches to just show up at an event like you would see in the summer and watch, the 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. time slots throughout the course of a tournament. Really, the one exception to that being Fort Myers, with the 2026 class, WWA underclass event down in Fort Myers in the first part of October. That's kind of the one event that gets circled on the calendar for Division I schools, really across all the different conferences, where they're going to go down and really spend the entire Friday, Saturday, Sunday recruiting and getting a chance to do a lot of cross-checking on their board as it pertains to that class.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating conversation, and obviously this is a little bit more 2026 and D1 driven, but how coaches handle the fall calendar with how busy it is, right? And even I said to you, right, I was never on a Division I staff. When we got into the fall, we had our class wrapped up. It was kind of like, hey, go to this event and hang out, go up to Scranton and watch some good baseball. And sure, if we saw a guy that we really liked, we would kind of accelerate the process. I can think of a kid specifically that was hurt all summer and he popped up and he was really athletic corner infielder with some power and looked physically ready to compete at a college level, not just our level. And it was like, yeah, let's pedal to the metal. Let's try to get this kid in the class as a +1, as they say, right? +1 and find a spot for him, an opportunity. But how do Division I coaches kind of handle it? And I've seen, this is probably the main question that I'm trying to ask here, is a lot more prospect camps on campus, right? When we're talking about time and coaches being able to maximize their time, I think for a lot of staffs, it seems like instead of pounding the pavement and being up on Staten Island on Saturday and then being down in Flemington, New Jersey on Sunday and being able to just pound the pavement, right, and just be a workhorse, it's a little bit easier for schools to just say, hey, why don't we just formally invite prospects to our camp, hold it on a Saturday morning, get some of our guys to help out. They can also get some work in, and we can also plan practice for the next week and make sure we're still rolling hot. So kind of talk about the differences between the exposure events versus the on-campus prospect camps.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see a lot of those prospect camps in October once the quiet period begins. You'll also see, some over, the next few weeks here to close out September. I think on the player perspective to this, especially as a 2025, you need to be in the know in terms of where that Division One, Division Two, Division Three, where that program is at with recruiting relative to your position. And, if you're getting, an email, make sure you're replying and asking those questions. Coach, thanks so much for the invitation to camp. I just wanted to reach out and see if you're still recruiting, a 2025 middle infielder or whatever, position pertains to you, and get a clear picture of that, relative to that program, so that you're not wasting your time by going to a place that is not a fit for you. In addition to that, I would say really trying to maximize those opportunities based on the feedback you've gotten to this point in the recruiting process, knowing full well that every program right now in 2025 has players that they are actively recruiting across their needs. So if it's a place that you haven't had a lot of communication with to this point in the process, even though they're still recruiting X position, there are guys ahead of you that they are further along with. So it needs to be a situation where you're going to have the skill set, the ability to go into that camp setting and really jump guys, right? And if your talent level doesn't play above that for that particular program, it becomes, in my opinion, a very difficult task to jump players that are further along in the process, whether that's, communicating with that coaching staff on a regular basis. Maybe they've visited, things of that nature. So just keep that in mind. I think you've got to really think long and hard about the decisions you're making relative to these camps. Lean on the people in your circle, your travel ball coach, your hitting coach, whoever it is that you kind of know and trust to help guide you a little bit, because I think you can spin your wheels a lot. You know what I mean, in terms of chasing things that aren't qualified leads for you as a prospect at this time of the year in the 2025 class.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? Is understanding kind of that, like you said, like these staffs are most likely recruiting at least somebody or have somebody committed that if we make a decision to go to a prospect camp, and we talk about allocation of funds, right? That's such a big piece in this puzzle, because we don't have infinite resources, including time, to just be able to travel. You go.
Yeah, I was going to say allocation of time too, because the fall season gets very condensed, right? These camps are happening on Saturday and Sunday. So, really good example of this, right? We have a player that works with us here at CSA, and he's got two schools that he's interested in, and their camps are on the same Saturday in September, coming up in a few weeks, right? And you have to make this time decision, right, in terms of where do I go, right? It's about understanding where those schools are relative to your position, how you fit into those programs, and what we think is the likelihood of the process expanding, to interest in an offer at this time. And that's how you have to go about thinking about which camp to go to. So obviously there's the financial aspect of this, but in the fall it's even more critical, because it's not a Monday through Sunday recruiting calendar. It really gets pigeonholed into those weekends, whether it's events or camps. So being very specific and maximizing the opportunities that you're pursuing become far more important than any other time period of the year.
Yeah, and coaches, we have to be selective on this side, but also coaches are selective in their process, like you're saying, of like if they have like it would be frustrating because you could be talented enough to go to X school, but if you're not actively being recruited by them and they're already recruiting three middle infielders, or a scenario that I've had with somebody I've been communicating with is two catchers committed at a school that they were interested in, and it's like, hey, like they ain't taking a third, especially at catcher, right? Like you're kind of hamstrung to that position, or you better be able to swing the bat really, really well and impress to be able to say like, hey, he could also play third, he could also play first, and just being able to understand that like at this point in juncture in the process, like we have to almost over communicate and be able to get those I hate to say answers, but at least clarity in the information of like, okay, like just be honest, right? Like that's all I'm asking is like just be honest in where maybe I stand in this process so that I can better again, I know most coaches I've been there, right? Like unless you have two catchers committed and things like that, but like where it's like, hey, like we just love to see you out at the prospect camp or things like that. Like they might give you that runaround answer, but that's why it's important to ask those questions so that just in case, like if a school says and you're a middle infielder and they're like, hey, we've already got three committed and we don't really have space for more. Like now you can better understand how to use that time and maybe those funds as well to make sure we make a strategic decision as we go into it. So I think this is a good time. We'll transition into a couple scenarios here that we have because we're kind of talking about how to handle these situations. So the first, let's start with this one. It's going to be a little bit more towards what we're talking about here. I'm a 2025 graduate. I have little traction, none at any level at this point in time. I'm really trying to put a winning strategy together for the fall. What should I do, right? At this point in time, what should I do?
Yeah, I think this is a common theme, across a lot of episodes. Make sure you have a really good evaluation because you need to be very specific with how you attend camps and communicate with coaches. You are playing a little bit of catch up, and that's okay. There are a lot of scenarios that I can remember back on where players were able to, really do the majority of their recruiting process throughout the course of September, October, November. But you need to hit on viable opportunities. And similar to what we were talking about in this previous segment, not waste time going after things that don't have the potential to land offers. So understand where your game fits within the levels of college baseball. I would say start to really hone in on places where your talent level plays up, right, in terms of the things that you're capable of doing on the field with your skill set, and pursue those chances. Ultimately, there are still a lot of programs recruiting, particularly at the Division II and Division III levels right now. So I would say focusing your sights in that direction would most likely make more sense for the majority of players that are in that situation. Don't panic, but definitely have to be very strategic in terms of finding the 4 to 6 camps over the next 2.5 months that make the most sense for you. Making sure that you've reached out to those coaches, you've sent some video, there's a gauge in terms of their interest level, and then hopefully it comes together and you're able to camp and have a great day in front of that particular staff and be in a position to see the process expand.
And I think what's really important here is being able to sit down and reflect on maybe what your summer schedule looked like and what you can do different in the fall to maximize it, right? So if your summer schedule, if you were at WWBA, if you were at these big events that Division I coaches were actively at, and again, we've had this conversation before, but if you're 2025 and still kind of holding on for that Division I interest, we really need to be strategic and reflective on how we handle these next couple months. But if you've been to a ton of prospect camps, if you've been to a ton of showcase events, if you've been to a ton of big events, and you know that, let's just say use North Carolina, for example, Duke, Carolina State, Campbell, we're at all these events, and you haven't heard from them, don't go to their prospect camps or don't go to events that might be theirs. Be able to take that information and say, okay, well, if I'm not a Division One prospect? What are the Division Two and Division Three schools and even some high-level JUCO schools in the state of North Carolina that I would be interested? That obviously maybe I need to tear down where I view myself and be able to make that strategic decision to spend that time and money at the proper camps, right? So being able to adjust. Okay, I know I played at this event, right, and it seemed like these three Division Three schools had some interest, right? Okay, maybe those are something where like you don't have to necessarily go to those three schools, but at least we can look at comparable schools to that level and then be able to make a decision that, okay, this is going to be our decision, is to get in front of these coaches as much as possible and then be able to build that strategy around that exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you. The ability to self-evaluate and be real with yourself in terms of how the process has played out to this point is imperative. And if you're not capable of doing that, you got to surround yourself with people who will be candid with you and point you in the right direction.
Definitely, definitely. So let's head to another 2025 scenario. I'm a 2025 graduate. I have a couple committable Division III offers, but my goal is, and my dream has always been to play Division I baseball. How should I handle the fall in maximizing these opportunities?
Yeah, so I would say, first, I think you're in a pretty good situation, right? If you have committable offers, right? Like, I say this to players that I work with all the time, right? Just over 7% of high school players get a chance to play college baseball. So if you're in that select group, you should really cherish that opportunity and understand the privilege it is to be a college student athlete and what you're being afforded in terms of the opportunities that lie ahead. Obviously, I think for most players, it's about trying to achieve your goals and reach your ceiling. I would tell you first and foremost in terms of those offers that you have, make sure you get to campus, right? Really start to do your due diligence on those offers and see what is of most interest to you as a student athlete. Right? If a couple of those, really start to become, strong opportunities, you need to focus your time and attention there and have a very clear understanding from that coaching staff in terms of what their timeline is for a decision and how they're proceeding with other players that they might be offering or considering offering. You don't want to be in a position, in my opinion, to run out that timeline and not have a strong place to commit to, right, in terms of your college baseball future. Yes, you might have a goal of being a Division I player, but again, it always gets back to fit, place where you can excel on the field, in the classroom as a person, and that is not dependent on the levels, right? When you look back at this thing 20 years down the line, right, your degree is going to be, a huge impact on your life at that point, right? So making sure that you're making a decision that is going to provide a pathway towards your career and give you a strong standpoint, in terms of future employers, and then in terms of the experiences on the field and the relationships that you're going to build with your teammates and your coaches, right? They're not more valuable. They're not of more significance at one level or the other, right? So make a great decision and don't allow yourself to be in a spot where you look up and all of a sudden those three offers have all gone by the wayside because you're chasing something that's not viable. So have a really good understanding of what those timelines look for and don't make a critical error in terms of letting those, go by the wayside. In terms of those, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, don't like neglect the opportunities that you have. You don't have to commit tomorrow, but like you said, get on campus, communicate with those coaches when they both sides. Like, don't just only respond when they text you. Send them your schedules. Be actively participating in the recruiting process. And if you happen to be lucky, right, and one of the outliers that has that Division I opportunity rise up in the fall of your senior year, great, that opportunity I think most coaches would understand, but don't just completely neglect the opportunities that you have and only look at this picture. Like, still actively be a participant in recruiting and work and try to get those opportunities if that's what you're still holding out on. But be smart about it is what is my basic point there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, make sure those coaches know your interest level, and you can be honest, like, coach, I love the visit. I'm very interested in being a part of your program. I have a couple of Division I opportunities that I'm just trying to see, if an offer is presented, but, I really am interested in being a part of the program, and I'm hoping to make a decision really soon. Right? I think that gives a clear depiction to that coaching staff of what you're trying to do, and hopefully allows them to give you a little bit of time, right, to make the best decision for you. But again, it's critical to know what the coaching staff has in terms of their expectation for a decision, because you don't want to be, looking back and saying I should have committed there while I had the opportunity. That's probably one of the worst positions to be in as a player. As it relates to those Division I schools, I would tell you to be really specific, right? This isn't, the time of the year to be chasing 40 Division I schools, right? You got to really hone in on what is possible in terms of exposure, right? Obviously, if you've been in front of some of those schools or have had some type of communication, that's a great starting point. But I think you got to be, very small-minded in terms of trying to pick maybe 2 or 3 of those Division I opportunities that you think have the most potential to culminate in offers in those time of the year. And that might be, again, combination of some type of expressed interest, also timelines for their decisions, right? And then how are you going to get in front of those given staffs at this time of the year, right? If you're coming up on, a potential deadline with one of those Division III schools that have offered you, and you're thinking about a Division I school that has camp in late October, like, that time alignment probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And that probably isn't something that from a calendar perspective is going to mesh, right? And always one of the hardest parts of the recruiting process is trying to get things to align. And some of that is out of your power as a player. A lot of that is out of your power as a player. So you need to really understand how that sets up. And then, again, be very attentive to the schools that have shown you the most love, that have offered you, that have given you that opportunity to be a part of that select group of players that get a chance to compete at the college level.
100%. Definitely couldn't agree more. I think that's a awesome kind of way to describe it. It looks like you got something to say there.
Yeah, I would just kind of flip this on you, right? Having coached at a Division III program that was a high level player in the region. You guys were recruiting a lot of guys that were in this scenario, right? That maybe had some Division I interest and wanted to kind of see how that was going to proceed during the fall months. How did you handle that from a coaching staff perspective with those players?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us was always just that open line of communication, right? Like, that was all like we expected, right? Was just like, hey, at least from my perspective, a lot of these conversations never made it past me, because it was just like I was touching base, and if a kid was upfront and honest and was like, hey, I got some opportunities that I'm looking to pursue, I'm really interested, and as long as they reciprocated that and really like handled it the right way. Now, handling it the right way is based off of the people that you're communicating with and the relationship you have. I can remember specifically a kid who actually ended up at a Division I school. When I picked up the phone, he was very respectful. He asked questions about our program. He expressed interest in getting on campus. He followed up when he was getting ready to commit and gave me an honest, he never did get on campus, gave me a very honest response like, hey, I really appreciate your interest in the opportunity. And again, like, this was a pretty high level arm that was uncommitted, and I just shot like a half court shot just to see where the interest was. And I think in his mind maybe he never even had a thought of coming to Arcadia, but he was very respectful about it, and I still remember that kid to this day and how he handled the situation and root for that kid, right? There was another kid who got on campus and was obviously reciprocating some interest, but say handled it the wrong way, I think is probably maybe a nice way of putting it, but it was kind of one of those scenarios where he expressed to us that, well, I'm really interested in your program because I have some other opportunities, but I think I could come here and play right away. And that's not the way to do it, right? Never ever say that. And he kind of expressed it that way. And I can tell you for certain, I don't know if Coach Torsani remembers this kid exactly, but when that kid left his visit that day, we basically said I'm not to establish any more contact with him. If he reaches out, we're going to be upfront and honest with him about the fact that we've gone in a different direction, because little did that kid know the schools that he was interested in at the Division II and Division I level, we would have beaten. Just being honest with you. Now we can't offer scholarship, and that's something that as a Division III school you will always understand. I would never kind of try to dip my toes in somebody's financial situation. So if a kid came to us and said, hey, like, I might get a scholarship at this school, it's a state school, it's an opportunity for me for the affordability aspect that you guys can't offer, fine. Never ever going to fight, which we had a lot of PSAC kids that ended up making that decision. They were finalists between us and a PSAC school, and they ended up choosing those PSAC schools with scholarship included, which completely understandable from the affordability and the state school aspect. But when you say, well, I think I could play right away, it's like, you better make sure you have a good understanding of what that coaching staff wants to hear from you, because, again, how Coach Torsani and I operated, you don't understand. Like, again, you play up the middle, and do you know who Alex Madera is? Now people know who Alex Madera is, but people didn't at the time. And if you think you're just going to walk into a school like that and play right away, let alone run our system to a full list of how we coached and how we operated. So that's kind of the dichotomy, the two sides of it, right? Of the good way to handle it and the bad way to handle it. And I still remember both those kids, and one is still playing college baseball and having success, and the other I don't believe is on the program that he originally started his college career with.
Not shocking.
Exactly, and not shocking. And I also remember another comment that was made on that day was, well, if I started at other school, would you guys be interested if it didn't work out and I wanted to transfer to your school? And obviously we didn't. We were just like, yeah, sure, the transfer portal is a reality of the college baseball today. Right when that kid left, it was, hey, we're on the same page, right? And it was, yeah, we're done. And that kid was supremely talented, and don't know if he's had success, haven't followed up recently, but I just know he didn't make it at the first school that he was at. So there's definitely a right way and a wrong way to handle it, but I think being respectful and understanding that a lot of these programs, you might be interested in a Division I program. If you're interested in a Division I program, you're also interested in a Division III program. That Division III program is probably pretty high level, right? They're probably competing at a really high level, quite frankly, if you're a talent that's good enough for both of them. So
For sure.
being able to understand that, like, on a level playing field, like, these schools are equal in opportunity. I think coaches are understanding a situation. So if it is an affordability thing, hey, completely understandable. But don't ever disrespect a school because of level, and understand that as long as you communicate what's going on, that most coaches are going to be understanding and open to what you're doing.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think as a player, you just have to understand their perspective, right? And at some point, they're going to need a decision, and you have to be ready to make that choice, right? That's it's a big boy decision, right? You're getting treated like a man, but you have to be critical of where you are in the process and make an informed decision at that point.
100%, 100%. And I think being able to kind of understand the situation that you're in, and again, communication and building these relationships are supremely important. Again, as I said earlier, it's like you feel like you want to sell yourself to a program, the program wants to sell yourself. Street goes both ways, and if you build a trusting relationship the same way you and I would build a trusting relationship with clientele or people that work with or for us, it's the same way this process is, right? It's no different, and you want to build a high-level relationship that's built on trust and through communication, right? That's how you do that. It's no different in the recruiting process. You don't have to be upfront and honest and spew everything that's going on, but don't withhold information. Don't be, kind of scheming behind their back. I think more times than not, as long as you're honest, and most times the coaches are going to be able to reciprocate and be okay with that. So last scenario here, 2026 graduate, so a little bit more time to be patiently proactive. We're not in the crunch time. Little traction after August 1, didn't have as many phone calls as I anticipated. What specifically should I do? And as I'm asking this question, I'm like, man, maybe if we had a little bit more context, like, are you not meeting the metrics that we hope to meet? Like, should we focus on player development? But let's just say broad picture, kid is talented enough to play at said level, but didn't hear back as much as he had hoped.
Yeah, I would say, we talked about this a little bit earlier on the episode, right? The 2026 pace of recruiting is definitely going slow. I think across, mid-major and small conference Division I programs, there was a bit of a de-emphasis on August 1st this time around versus last year, and not getting caught up in the, the rat race, for lack of a better way of saying it, of, everybody trying to get on the phone with 2026s so quickly. I can think of an example just back to last year. We had a young man in our program here at CSA. He got maybe one or two calls, or maybe even just text messages, if I remember right, on August 1st. And, but went out and as the fall recruiting period opened, I had a really strong play. Ended up going to, a showcase in October right before the quiet period began. And, he's a guy who ended up committed before Thanksgiving, right? So it can happen. Don't use communication to this point as a determination of, the fall being a active recruiting period or not for you. Again, some of the coaches just aren't going to reach out unless they're ready to really start to move the process along in a strong manner. Right? Everybody, I think, has this picture of, the recruiting process being this, 6 to 8 month build out in terms of conversation and building this relationship. And are there examples of that? Yes, but there's also a lot of examples of, that formulating over a 3-week period and moving at a very rapid pace. So, ultimately, if you're a talented player and the evaluation of the people around you is that you have a chance to, be in the potential position to have offers, to close out this calendar year. I think you need to be patiently proactive. You need to make sure that the coaches that, you've identified as potential fits have your fall schedule, right? Send that email out, right? We've outlined some of that in previous conversation. Send some, maybe some highlight film from the summer. And then, if you're going down to Fort Myers for underclass, I would say that's another good point in the fall calendar to follow up with a second email campaign. Make sure they have your schedule, any updates from the fall to this point. If you took the August SAT, maybe a test score that's now available if you're a higher academic kid, and put yourself in a position, to take advantage of that setting. And then from there, I would say if you started to see some elevated opportunities, or there's some feedback through your child ball coach or people that are in your circle, then maybe those camps are places to identify for October, November before you get into your off-season period. So a lot can still happen for 2026. I wouldn't use August 1st as a true barometer or not in terms of how proactive and aggressive you need to be in this fall period. Obviously,
I think
from a skill set perspective, if you're not quite there yet,
Yep.
then it's more about getting out there and just competing and continuing to hone your skills, taking the things that you're working on in the practice setting, between the white lines. But those are two very different scenarios.
Mm-hmm. And that's my big thing is if you're a 2026 and you're listening to this and you're like, this is me, this is what, sit back, take some time. I know we're kickstarting the recruiting period. You're probably going to have an event this weekend, whatever it is. But sit back and reflect maybe why those calls didn't come in. And this is where it's important to have people that you trust. Is it a physical development reason or is it an opportunity reason, right? Did we not get in front of the right people over the summer months or before to be able to get those opportunities to have coaches reach out? Do they not know you exist? In those scenarios, it could just be a matter of one, hey, go out and bump an 89 in front of the right coaches at Fort Myers and you're good to go, right? Okay, that's a simple fix and just continuing to go through the process. Or is it a physical, right? Are you not checking the metrics that we would hope to check? Maybe then it's a good time to, again, a little late now coming from us because you probably already signed up for a full fall schedule, or maybe you have some prospect camps lined up, is the question that we talked about months ago. When should I start going to prospect camps? When you're ready. If you take the next We're in month 8 of the year. So if you take the next 6 months, we're in month 9 of the year, take the next 6 months before your high school season starts and really focus on your development and pop on March 1st when you get out there for high school games, nobody's even going to be like, yeah, we didn't call this kid on our... No, it's the same thing as the process. All you have to do is have those opportunities to stand out, crush the 2025 year, get yourself on the map, and those opportunities could present themselves. So really take time to be like, am I physically ready or metrically ready to go out and perform at a prospect camp? Well, maybe if I'm not, hey, get a strength conditioning coach, spend that money wisely. Let's not travel up and down the East Coast. Let's take the time to develop physically. Let's get better. Let's pop come March 1, and let's be a stud prospect in the 2026 cycle next summer. But if it's just like, hey, I feel like I'm ready, people around me feel like I'm ready, people that I trust feel like I'm ready, okay, maybe we do maximize this fall time frame and these opportunities.
Yeah, and I would just harp back on the fact that, again, schools are working at their own pace. Right? And sometimes they just haven't been super proactive with those calls, right? Maybe they've expressed interest to somebody that but you haven't heard from them. It's important that you reach out to them. Coach, here's my schedule. Continue to pursue it. But everybody's time frame is going to be different. But again, patiently proactive. If you're in that spot, make sure you're being a good communicator and putting the information in front of the coaches, particularly ahead of WWBA underclass or an event in your region that has typically been a recruiting hotbed during this fall period in years past.
100%. And ultimately, all it takes is one good outing in front of the right people, and your whole recruiting landscape can change, and the conversations can change on a dime like that. That's the beauty of this process, is getting in front of the right people, performing in front of the right people, and ultimately being able to maximize those opportunities. But really good conversation there for 2025s. We hit all of them. Guys that have had contact, guys that have not had contact, 2026s, guys that have had a ton of contact and have a good position and foundation, and then guys that maybe are looking for a little bit more. So if you're a 2025 or 2026 grad, hopefully we cross some boxes and we're able to get the information to you that you needed. Obviously beyond that, continue your development. If you're a 2027 who's looking for some groundbreaking information, just get better, play good baseball, and the opportunities will arise. But I think that was a ton of good information for anybody listening. If you enjoyed, make sure you subscribe. Most importantly, share with 5 friends, share with 5 families, share with a couple parents of the organization that you're within, and be able to kind of direct them to us, whether it's Backside Ground Balls Media YouTube channel, The Trail, on all podcast platforms, whatever it is. You want to reach out to Sam, you want to work with Sam, he's one of the best in the business, reach out to him directly. All of those things are options that you have here. So if you like what you hear here on the YouTube channel or on the podcast platform, make sure you're following us on all spaces. For more, we're going to try to produce this stuff weekly, especially through the off season, making sure everybody's squared away so that they can make a winning strategy through the recruiting process. But Sam, that will do for this episode of The Trail. We'll see you next time on The Trail.